Moscow at night has a particular kind of stillness. A cold, metallic stillness that settles across the city like frost on steel. Along the banks of the Moscow River, light reflects off the semi-frozen surface in fractured shapes, shimmering beneath the weight of winter. Inside the Kremlin, that calm is only surface level. Behind closed doors, tension coils like a compressed spring. A high-level security meeting has just ended. The topic: whether Russia should escalate its nuclear posture, even considering a return to testing, an act that would upend decades of global stability. The atmosphere is severe, reflective of a moment when a single decision could reshape the security landscape of Europe and beyond. But there is something strange in the room. A chair remains empty. Not just any chair, the chair of the foreign minister, Sergey Lavrov, a man who for 2 decades embodied the face of Russian diplomacy. He is a fixture in every high-stakes gathering, except this one. The absence is not explained. Not by the Kremlin, not by the foreign ministry, not by any official source. There is no schedule, no public appearance, no routine statement, nothing. And in Moscow, silence is never accidental. It is a signal. Soon after, reports emerged that Lavrov has been removed from Russia's G20 delegation. Then word spreads that he was the only permanent member missing from the recent nuclear strategy meeting. His public schedule disappears for 2 weeks. His name fades from state broadcasts. His place in official photos vanishes. Piece by piece, a picture forms. Something far larger than a diplomatic reshuffle is unfolding inside the Kremlin. A rupture in the system itself. And that rupture is the beginning of a shift in Russian power that could shape the next decade. This is the story of why it happened and why it matters far beyond Moscow. The chain reaction begins with a single event, a phone call. On October 20th, Sergey Lavrov spoke with his American counterpart. The call was supposed to be routine, a step toward arranging a high-profile summit between the Russian president and the American president. A summit the Kremlin viewed not as symbolic, but existential. One meeting had already taken place earlier in the year, but Moscow wanted something bigger, more central, more ceremonial. A gathering in Budapest, in the heart of Europe, where cameras would capture an image of Russia not as an isolated power, but as a negotiating force. For the Russian leadership, this was more than diplomacy. This was an opportunity to reframe their strategic position at a moment of severe economic pressure. A chance to ease tensions, reset the narrative, and gain leverage internationally. But according to detailed accounts circulated through political channels, the call did not go as planned. Lavrov reportedly adopted a rigid, confrontational tone, one that American officials interpreted as unrealistic and unproductive. The memorandum prepared by Russia's foreign ministry allegedly pushed demands too far, creating the impression not of negotiation, but ultimatum. 24 hours later, the summit was canceled. The official reasoning was simple: the timing wasn't right. But behind the scenes, the interpretation was clear. The chance to reset relations, even slightly, had slipped away. On the very same day, a new wave of economic measures was announced targeting Russia's 2 largest energy companies. These restrictions sent shockwaves through global markets. Companies worldwide rushed to sever ties to avoid being caught in the fallout. The Russian economy, heavily reliant on energy revenues, felt the tremors immediately. Inside the Kremlin, the mood shifted. The cancellation was not seen as a diplomatic miscommunication. It was viewed as sabotage, a collapse of a carefully crafted strategy. And in systems where power flows vertically, failures move upward until they land directly on the person who must be blamed. Lavrov, despite 20 years of service, became that person. Within days, he was removed from the G20 delegation, then from the Security Council's strategic meetings. His schedule vanished, his presence disappeared. Publicly, officials dismissed all speculation. Statements insisted that nothing had changed, that Lavrov remained foreign minister, that rumors of a rift were misinformation. But the denials came too quickly, too sharply. And when denials arrive with that kind of urgency, it often means something deeper is unfolding behind the curtain. The spark had ignited something far larger, something that had been building inside the Kremlin for years. To understand the true meaning of Lavrov's disappearance, everything must be placed within a broader network of power, one that stretches across the Russian state like a dense web of alliances, rivalries, and survival instincts. For 2 decades, the Russian political system rested on an informal balance between 3 primary factions. First, the security elite. The Siloviki, figures tied to intelligence, defense, and internal enforcement. This group forms the spine of the state, wielding the power of surveillance, coercion, and control. They are the guardians of stability, and at times, the architects of pressure. Second, the technocrats. Economists, central bankers, policy managers, and administrative specialists. Their job is to keep the machinery running, stabilize the economy, manage budgets, negotiate with foreign markets, ensure industrial output. Their power lies not in force, but competence. Third, the political managers and propagandists. The individuals who maintain narrative control, shaping public opinion, controlling media cycles, and reinforcing legitimacy. Lavrov always sat at the intersection of these groups. He was more than a foreign minister, he was a bridge. The system's outward-facing diplomat who translated Moscow's internal calculus for the world. But by late 2024 and early 2025, that system was straining. The war dragged on, economic pressure intensified, political factions began blaming one another for setbacks, and then an entirely new power center began emerging. The President's Family Network. According to independent investigations cited throughout your file, at least 24 individuals connected by blood or marriage to the president now hold positions across ministries, energy enterprises, state corporations, and economic councils. These roles are not symbolic. They sit at the levers of resources, from natural gas to technology procurement to regional administration. This is no accident. Historically, when regimes experience internal stress, they often shift toward what political scientists describe as familial consolidation. It is a defensive posture, a way to guard against betrayal by elevating those with shared lineage rather than shared ideology. To technocrats, this shift feels threatening. Their influence is tied to expertise. When expertise becomes secondary to blood connection, their future becomes uncertain. To security elites, the rise of the family threatens their dominance. They have long been the inner circle, but a circle of relatives is tighter. To political managers, it introduces uncertainty. Narrative control becomes harder when factions within the state no longer move in sync. All this pressure creates friction. And friction creates instability, which brings the story back to Lavrov. The foreign minister was not merely replaced, he was erased from visibility. Not because he opposed the system, he didn't. Not because he lacked loyalty, he didn't. But because he represented the old model of professional governance, a model that no longer aligns with the Kremlin's new trajectory. At the same time, an ideological split has erupted within the pro-war space. Hardline commentators on social platforms, some of whom once championed the state, began arguing that the war effort lacked conviction. Their rising influence threatened the messaging hierarchy. Recent months saw several of these commentators face consequences. Their removal sent a message not only to critics, but to supporters. The system is tightening. Loyalty alone is no longer enough. Ideological purity is no longer enough. The only guaranteed safe category left is family. That is the environment in which Lavrov disappeared. Not as a symbol of treachery, but as a casualty of a new architecture of power. A Kremlin where the walls are closing in. And the circle is shrinking. The real turning point in this story is not Lavrov's disappearance. It is the transformation happening beneath it. For 2 decades, the core logic of Russian governance could be summarized in one principle: loyalty above all. As long as officials remained loyal, their mistakes were forgiven. Their positions were secure. This principle held even during crises. Military setbacks did not remove key defense officials. Economic disruptions did not topple technocrats. Political missteps did not dislodge long-standing advisors. The system's resilience came from its predictability. But that predictability is now gone. Lavrov's removal signals a fundamental shift. Loyalty is no longer sufficient. Competence is no longer decisive. Only proximity to the family guarantees influence. This is the game changer. To understand why, imagine the Kremlin as a fortress under siege. Not physically, but politically, economically, and diplomatically. External pressure grows. Internal factions compete. Trust erodes. In such an environment, leaders often fall back on the only network they believe cannot betray them: blood. This transition reshapes the system in several ways. 1. Decision-making becomes more concentrated. When family members occupy key nodes in energy, finance, and administration, decisions travel through fewer channels. This increases speed but decreases reliability. 2. Expertise becomes fragmented. Professional diplomats like Lavrov serve as navigators in the complex world of geopolitics. When they are removed, specialized knowledge is lost. Less experienced individuals step in, not due to merit, but trust. 3. The state begins operating like a private holding company. This is not metaphorical. When relatives manage strategic sectors, control over revenue streams becomes privatized. The distinction between national assets and family assets blurs. 4. The risk of miscalculation rises. Diplomacy thrives on precision. Replacing a seasoned diplomat with a technocrat for a major summit signals a move away from calculated maneuvering towards symbolic gesture. 5. The internal hierarchy becomes unpredictable. If 20 years of loyalty can be wiped out in a single week, every official becomes a potential target. Surveillance increases, paranoia grows, efficiency collapses. This is why Lavrov's absence from the nuclear strategy meeting matters. It is not symbolic, it is structural. A system that once integrated expert voices is now relying on a far smaller circle, one built not on expertise, but on personal trust. Historically, such transitions have profound consequences. In many countries, the shift from professional governance to familial governance precedes major political realignment. The center becomes stronger, but the wider system weakens. Decision-making becomes more personalized. Stability becomes fragile. Lavrov is simply the most visible casualty of this new order, and the rise of the family network is its most important feature. Once the structure of power shifts, consequences spread outward, touching every aspect of national and international politics. Domino 1. Strategic military posture. When experienced diplomats are removed from the inner circle, foreign policy becomes more tightly linked to security agencies. The approach becomes more defensive, more suspicious, and more unilateral. Negotiations become harder. Tension becomes routine. The absence of a seasoned negotiator during discussions of nuclear posture is not a coincidence. It reflects a strategic turn inward, a belief that security challenges are better handled by those who operate through pressure rather than persuasion. Domino 2. Economic uncertainty. The global reaction to the latest economic restrictions on Russian energy giants reveals the fragility of Russia's financial ecosystem. When corporations withdraw from contracts to avoid penalties, revenue streams constrict. In such a climate, replacing professionals with trusted individuals may reinforce control, but it undermines credibility. Investors retreat, international cooperation shrinks, the economy becomes more isolated. The family network's rise complicates this further. When key sectors appear controlled by a small circle, transparency declines. Markets react poorly to opacity. Without experienced negotiators to maintain foreign contacts, economic bridges deteriorate. Domino 3. Domestic political pressure inside Russia. The removal of familiar figures fuels uncertainty. Officials who once saw loyalty as their shield now question their positions. A culture of caution intensifies. Decision-making slows as risk aversion grows. At the same time, the crackdown on extreme pro-war commentators signals that the state is tightening its grip. These commentators were once tools of mobilization, but when tools become threats, they are neutralized. The dual pressure, replacing elites and silencing radicals, creates an atmosphere where unpredictability becomes the new normal. Domino 4. Global strategic impact. Other major powers interpret this shift not as a sign of strength, but volatility. When diplomats vanish, when family members rise, when internal factions collide, states that rely on predictable partners grow wary. Energy markets sense instability and adjust prices. Negotiations on global security become more complex. Alliance structures shift in anticipation of future developments. This is the broader impact of Lavrov's disappearance. Not the fall of one official, but a fundamental signal to the world. The Kremlin is reorganizing from the inside out. Russia now stands at a critical juncture. The disappearance of Sergey Lavrov from the public and political arena signals more than a shift in diplomatic leadership. It is evidence of a deeper transformation, the consolidation of power within a narrowing circle defined not by expertise or loyalty, but by family ties. This shift places the Kremlin on a path with three potential directions. Scenario 1. The family fortress solidifies. The family network becomes the core of the state. Control over energy, finance, and political management concentrates in the hands of relatives. This produces temporary stability but weakens institutional resilience. Diplomacy becomes less flexible. International isolation deepens. Scenario 2. Internal fractures intensify as Siloviki, technocrats, and political managers lose influence. Tensions rise. These tensions may not surface publicly, but they slow decision-making, impair crisis management, and increase the risk of conflicting agendas within the state. Scenario 3. Strategic realignment. Facing economic pressure and diplomatic isolation, the Kremlin may attempt a recalibration in its foreign posture. But without experienced diplomats, the process becomes uncertain. Opportunities may be missed. Misunderstandings may grow. Whatever path emerges, the old model, the one built on long-term loyalty, professional competence, and a predictable hierarchy, is fading. A new model, centered on personal trust and concentrated power, is taking its place. The coming months will reveal which trajectory the Kremlin chooses, and the rest of the world will need to watch closely. Because what happens inside Moscow now will not stay inside Moscow. It will ripple outward into global energy markets, security alliances, diplomatic calculations, and economic stability. The question is no longer about one man's disappearance. It is about an entire system in motion. What does a state become when its leadership narrows to a family circle? How stable is a system where loyalty is no longer enough? And how will this new architecture reshape Russia's role in the world over the next year? Share your thoughts below, and stay tuned for more in-depth analysis of the world's shifting geopolitical landscape.